"You're just a senile old woman," my son shouted. So I changed the locks on the business I built. Imagine this. It's 6:15 a.m. on a crisp Monday morning in October. My son Marcus is standing outside what he thought was his restaurant, frantically, jiggling the door handle while two burly construction workers finish installing brand new deadbolt locks. His face is cycling through confusion, disbelief, and slowly dawning horror as he realizes his key, the key he's used for 8 years, no longer works. Behind him, his wife Kate is pacing back and forth on her phone, her voice getting shriller by the minute as she demands to speak to someone in charge at the locksmith company. What she doesn't know yet is that I am the someone in charge. I'm sitting in my car across the street, sipping my morning coffee, and watching 20 years of entitlement and disrespect come crashing down in real time. When Marcus finally spots me through my windshield, the look of pure shock on his face was absolutely priceless. This was the moment my son, who had called me a senile old woman just 5 days earlier, finally learned not to underestimate his mother. But let me tell you the whole story of what led to that glorious morning. Because, honey, this revenge was 45 years in the making. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Grandma's Justice. My name is Dorothy Chen. I'm 73 years old, and I've spent the last 4.5 decades learning that sometimes the people who should love you most are the ones who'll try to take advantage of you the fastest. I've always believed in family, loyalty, hard work, and treating people with respect, especially your elders who sacrificed everything to give you opportunities. I thought my children understood these values. I thought they respected me and appreciated the empire I'd built from absolutely nothing. Boy, was I wrong. I was about to find out just how wrong I was. And what happens when you push a grandmother who built a multi-million-dollar business empire with her bare hands and isn't about to let some ungrateful kids destroy it? If you've ever felt taken for, granted by your own family, if you've ever been dismissed because of your age, or if you believe that respect for your elders isn't just an old-fashioned saying, but a fundamental value, then you're going to want to hear this story. And if you've ever fantasized about teaching some entitled family members a lesson they'll never forget, well, grab some popcorn because this is going to be satisfying. Before we dive in, I want you to drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever had to remind someone in your family not to underestimate you? Have you ever been called too old or out of touch by people who should know better? Let me know your stories. I read every single comment, and I love connecting with viewers who understand that wisdom and strength don't have expiration dates. And don't forget to hit that like button if you're ready to see some entitled family. Members get exactly what they deserve, and subscribe to Grandma's Justice for more stories where experience trumps arrogance and respect is earned, not just expected. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Now, to understand why this moment was so satisfying, I need to take you back to the beginning. Not just the beginning of this conflict, but the beginning of everything. Because this story starts 45 years ago when my late husband Jin and I stepped off a plane in San Francisco with nothing but 2 suitcases, $347 in cash, and a dream that seemed impossible. We didn't speak perfect English. We didn't have family connections or business contacts. What we had was a work ethic that would make most people today collapse from exhaustion and a determination to build something lasting for our children. Jin took a job washing dishes at a Chinese restaurant in Chinatown, working 16-hour shifts for barely minimum wage. I worked as a seamstress in a garment factory during the day and cleaned office buildings at night. For 3 years, we lived in a tiny 1-bedroom apartment above a laundromat. We ate rice and vegetables for dinner most nights because we were saving every penny for our dream, opening our own restaurant. I remember counting quarters and dimes on our kitchen table, calculating how much we needed for a security deposit, for equipment, for permits, for everything. When I found out I was pregnant with Marcus, my first child, Jin wanted me to quit my night job, but I kept working until I was 8 months pregnant because we were so close to our goal. I gave birth to Marcus on a Tuesday and was back to work the following Monday because we couldn't afford for me to take time off. Finally, in 1982, we had enough saved to lease a tiny 800-square-foot space in what was then a rough neighborhood. The Golden Dragon Family Restaurant, our first location. The previous tenant had left it in terrible condition. There were holes in the walls, the kitchen equipment was falling apart, and the dining room looked like it hadn't been cleaned in years. Jin and I spent 3 months renovating that space ourselves. We painted every wall, installed new flooring, rebuilt the kitchen from scratch. I was 7 months pregnant with my second child, Linda, but I was up on ladders painting trim and scrubbing floors until my water broke. Those early years were brutal. I worked 18-hour days, 7 days a week. I was the cook, the cashier, the bookkeeper, the cleaner, and the manager. Jin handled the heavy lifting and deliveries. We couldn't afford to hire help, so our children grew up in that restaurant. Marcus did his homework at table 12 every afternoon. Linda took her first steps between the kitchen and the dining room. My youngest, Peter, learned to count by helping me sort receipts. The restaurant barely broke even for the first 5 years. There were months when we chose between paying rent or buying groceries. I remember one Christmas when we had $17 left after paying bills, and I made presents for the children out of fabric scraps from my old sewing job. But slowly, gradually, our reputation grew. Customers started coming back. Word spread about the quality of our food and the warmth of our service. By the time Marcus was 10 years old, we were turning a small profit. By the time he was 15, we were successful enough to hire our first employee. Throughout all of this, I made sure my children understood the value of what we were building. They worked in the restaurant from the time they could reach the counter. They learned every aspect of the business: cooking, serving, cleaning, managing inventory, handling customer complaints. I wanted them to understand that success comes from hard work, not entitlement. Marcus was always the most interested in the business side. He would sit with me when I did the books and ask questions about profit margins and supplier negotiations. He seemed to inherit my head for numbers and my ability to spot inefficiencies. I was so proud when he told me he wanted to study business in college. I paid for his education at UC Berkeley, $43,000 in tuition and expenses over 4 years. I was so proud when he graduated with honors and a degree in business administration. Even more proud when he told me he wanted to join the family business full-time. But looking back now, I think that's when the problem started. Marcus came back from college with big ideas and fancy business terminology. He started talking about modernizing our approach and implementing best practices. At first, I thought it was wonderful that he was bringing fresh energy to the business. I was wrong. What he was really doing was starting to see me as an obstacle to his vision of what the restaurant should become. By 2010, the business had grown to 2 locations. I was 58 years old and starting to think about slowing down, maybe letting Marcus take on more responsibility. That's when he met Kate Jacobson, a marketing coordinator at a tech company who had very strong opinions about how modern businesses should operate. Kate was polite enough to my face at first, but I could tell she thought I was old-fashioned. She would make little comments about how cute it was that I still wrote receipts by hand sometimes, or how quaint our traditional decorating style was. She started filling Marcus's head with ideas about updating everything: the menu, the decor, the customer service approach, even the recipes that had made us successful in the first place. I paid for their wedding in 2012, $38,000 for a ceremony at the Ritz-Carlton, because Kate insisted on having it there. I bit my tongue when she invited 150 of her friends and family, but only allowed me to invite 12 people. I smiled and wrote the check because I wanted Marcus to be happy. That same year, Marcus asked me to make him an official partner in the business. I was hesitant, not because I didn't trust him, but because I'd built this empire and wasn't ready to give up control. But he was my son, and he'd worked hard, so I agreed to give him a 32% stake while I retained 68% ownership. That was my first mistake. The moment Marcus became a partner, his attitude changed completely. Suddenly, he wasn't just my son helping with the family business. He was a business partner who deserved equal say in all decisions. He started contradicting me in front of employees, questioning my choices, and making changes without consulting me. The disrespect started small. He'd roll his eyes when I'd suggest sticking with our traditional recipes. He'd interrupt me during staff meetings to clarify what I meant. He started introducing me to new suppliers and contractors as my mother, who founded the business, in a tone that made it clear he thought I was a relic from the past. Kate's influence became more obvious after they got married. She would attend business meetings she wasn't invited to, and offer unsolicited advice about everything from our advertising strategy to our hiring practices. When I politely suggested that she might not understand our industry, she'd laugh and say something like, "Oh, Dorothy, that's such an old-school way of thinking." In 2014, I co-signed for Marcus to buy a house in the suburbs. The mortgage was $4,200 a month, more than Jin and I had spent on rent for our first 20 years in America. I also co-signed for his BMW because Kate insisted they needed reliable transportation that reflected their status. I was paying for their lifestyle, but I told myself it was an investment in my son's future. That same year, Kate got pregnant with their first child, my granddaughter Amy. I was over the moon. I'd always dreamed of being a grandmother, and I spoiled that little girl from the moment she was born. I set up a college fund for her and contributed $500 every month. I bought her clothes, toys, books, everything a grandmother dreams of doing. But even then, I started noticing concerning signs. Marcus and Kate would drop Amy off at my house for babysitting with barely any notice. They'd leave her for entire weekends while they went on trips, treating me like a free childcare service rather than a grandmother who deserved respect for her time and effort. When Amy was old enough to talk, she'd repeat things she'd heard at home. Once, when she was about 4, she told me, "Mommy says you're too old to understand how business works now." Another time, she asked me why I was so bossy about the restaurant when Daddy is the one who really runs it. Children don't come up with these ideas on their own. They hear them from their parents. In 2016, their second child, Kevin, was born, and I repeated the same pattern. College fund, monthly contributions, constant gifts and attention. But by then, the family dynamics had shifted even more. Marcus was running the day-to-day operations of both restaurants, and I was supposedly semi-retired, though I still came in every day to check on things. The problem was that Marcus didn't want me checking on things. He started making it clear that my presence was unwelcome. He'd schedule important meetings when I wasn't available. He'd make decisions about menu changes, staff hiring, and supplier contracts without consulting me. When I'd ask about these changes, he'd act like I was being unreasonably controlling. "Mom, you said you wanted to step back," he'd say with barely concealed irritation. "You can't have it both ways. Either you trust me to run the business, or you don't." But stepping back didn't mean stepping aside completely. These were still my restaurants, built with my sweat and sacrifice. I had every right to stay informed about major decisions. Kate became even more brazen in her disrespect. She started referring to me as Marcus's mother in conversations with friends and family, as if I didn't have my own identity. She'd make jokes about my interference in the business, rolling her eyes whenever I'd offer suggestions or ask questions. So, breaking point in terms of personal disrespect came at Amy's 6th birthday party in 2018. I'd spent hours preparing traditional Chinese dishes that Amy loved: dumplings, sweet and sour pork, my special fried rice. But Kate had also ordered pizza and chicken nuggets from a chain restaurant. When it came time to eat, Kate made a big show of steering the children away from my food. "Kids, there's pizza over here if you want something more familiar," she announced, loudly. Several parents looked uncomfortable, but Kate didn't care. Later, when I was cleaning up, I overheard her talking to another mother. "Dorothy means well, but she doesn't understand that kids today have different tastes. She's very old-fashioned about everything: food, business, parenting. We're trying to gently help her understand that times have changed. I felt like I'd been slapped. Here I was, cleaning up after a party I'd helped pay for, listening to my daughter-in-law describe me like I was some confused elderly relative who needed to be managed rather than respected. The business disrespect escalated around the same time. Marcus opened a third location in 2019 without discussing it with me first. I found out when I saw the lease agreement on his desk. When I asked about it, he said it was a good opportunity that came up quickly, and he didn't want to bother me with the details. Bother me. I was the majority owner of the company, and he was making decisions about expansion without my input. That's when I realized that in Marcus's mind, I had already been pushed aside. He was treating me like a silent partner who should be grateful for whatever information he chose to share, rather than the founder and majority owner of the business. Tatinin, grandchildren's attitudes reflected their parents' disrespect. As Amy and Kevin got older, they became increasingly dismissive of me. They'd barely look up from their phones when I visited. They'd sigh dramatically when I tried to share family stories or talk about the old days, when I'd offer to teach them traditional recipes or tell them about their heritage. They'd act like I was boring them with irrelevant ancient history. Kevin, who was 8 by then, once asked me why I still pretended to be in charge of the restaurants when everyone knows Dad runs them now. When I asked where he'd heard that, he said, "Mom and Dad were talking about it. They said you don't understand how business works anymore. These children I'd supported financially since birth, whose college funds I'd been faithfully contributing, to whose every birthday and Christmas I'd made magical with generous gifts. They saw me as an embarrassment, an obstacle, a relic from the past who didn't understand the modern world." The restaurant staff started treating me differently too. New employees would defer to Marcus for everything, even though I was still the majority owner. Long-term employees who had worked for me for decades started looking to Marcus for approval before implementing any suggestions I made. My own recipes, the ones that had built our reputation and attracted customers for decades, were being updated without my consultation. Marcus would make changes and then present them to me as accomplished facts. When I'd express concern, he'd act like I was being unreasonably resistant to change. "Mom, we have to evolve with the times," he'd say patronizingly. "Customers want different things now. You built something great, but it's time to let the next generation take it forward." The next generation. As if I was already dead and buried. By 2020, I felt like a stranger in my own business. My office, the office where I'd built this empire, where I'd made every major decision for 38 years, had been turned into a storage room. Marcus had moved into the larger office and redecorated it completely, removing all traces of my presence. The worst part was that I'd let it happen. I'd been so focused on being the generous, supportive mother and grandmother that I'd allowed them to gradually push me out of my own life's work. I'd confused their entitlement with gratitude, their manipulation with family loyalty. But I was about to learn that there's a difference between being generous and being a doormat. And my family was about to learn that you should never underestimate a woman who built an empire from nothing, especially when she's got nothing left to lose. The incident that changed everything happened on a Tuesday afternoon in March 2023. I'd been growing increasingly concerned about the direction of the business, so I'd scheduled what I thought would be a routine family meeting to discuss some issues I'd noticed. Food costs had increased by 23% over the past 6 months, but menu prices hadn't been adjusted accordingly. Customer complaint scores on review sites had dropped from 4.7 stars to 4.2 stars across all 3 locations. Staff turnover had increased, and I'd noticed that the kitchen at the original location looked disorganized and chaotic compared to the tight ship I'd always run. These weren't minor issues. They were signs of a business in decline. I'd seen it happen to competitors who'd gotten complacent or lost focus on the fundamentals. I'd built Golden Dragon by paying attention to every detail, and I wasn't about to watch it fall apart due to neglect. I'd asked Marcus to meet me at the original restaurant at 2 p.m. on Wednesday, after the lunch rush but before dinner prep started. I wanted to discuss these concerns and work together on solutions. I thought we were partners after all. But when I walked into the restaurant that Wednesday afternoon, I realized Marcus had very different plans for our meeting. He was sitting at the large round table in the back dining room, the table where we'd held family celebrations for decades. But he wasn't alone. Kate was there, of course, along with a man I didn't recognize wearing an expensive suit and carrying a leather briefcase. "Mom, thanks for coming," Marcus said, though his tone was stiff and formal rather than warm. "I'd like you to meet David Peterson. He's our family attorney." "Our family attorney? Since when did we have a family attorney that I didn't know about?" Sat down slowly, my heart already starting to pound. "I thought we were meeting to discuss the business concerns I mentioned." Marcus exchanged a look with Kate, and she nodded slightly. It was clearly a signal they'd planned in advance. "We are discussing business concerns," Marcus said. "But Mom, we need to talk about your role in the company moving forward." The attorney opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents. "Mrs. Chen, your son and daughter-in-law have asked me to help facilitate a conversation about transitioning your involvement in Golden Dragon Enterprises." I looked at the papers he was sliding across the table. The top page was titled, "Voluntary Transfer of Management Authority," and it was filled with legal language I didn't immediately understand. "What is this?" I asked. Kate leaned forward with that fake sympathetic smile I'd grown to hate. "Dorothy, we've been watching you struggle with some of the business decisions lately, and we think it might be time for you to step back and let Marcus take full control." "Struggle?" I repeated. "What are you talking about?" Marcus cleared his throat. "Mom, last week, you questioned the new supplier contracts that I'd already negotiated and signed. You've been second-guessing staffing decisions, menu changes, even our marketing strategy. It's creating confusion among the employees." "Those supplier contracts were overpriced by 15%, I said firmly. "I've been negotiating with food suppliers since before you were born. And the staffing decisions you're referring to involve firing Maria Gonzalez, who's been with us for 12 years and has never had a single customer complaint." "See, this is exactly what we're talking about," Kate interjected. "You're getting confused about the reasoning behind these decisions." Marcus explained the supplier situation perfectly. "We're paying more for higher quality ingredients to improve our reputation." "Higher quality ingredients?" I almost laughed. "Kate, you don't know the difference between soy sauce and teriyaki sauce. Don't lecture me about food quality." That's when Marcus's composure cracked. His face flushed red and his voice rose. "That's exactly the kind of attitude we're talking about. You're being disrespectful and dismissive of input from people who understand how modern business works." "Modern business?" I stood up, my own voice getting louder. "This business was built on quality ingredients, excellent service, and treating employees with respect. Those aren't modern concepts. They're timeless principles that you seem to have forgotten." The attorney looked uncomfortable, but Kate was just getting started. "Dorothy, we love you, but you're not as sharp as you used to be. You're 73 years old. It's natural for cognitive abilities to decline with age. We're not trying to hurt you. We're trying to protect you from making mistakes that could damage the business you worked so hard to build." The words hit me like physical blows. Cognitive decline. Not as sharp. 73 years old, as if my age automatically made me incompetent. But Marcus wasn't finished. He slammed his hand on the table, and his voice erupted in a shout that echoed through the empty restaurant. "You're just a senile old woman. You don't understand how business works anymore. This is the 21st century, not 1978. The silence that followed was deafening. The attorney was staring at his hands, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation had taken. Kate was looking at Marcus with what I realized was satisfaction. She'd gotten him to say what she'd been thinking all along. But I was staring at my son, this man I'd sacrificed everything for, whose diapers I'd changed in the back office, between serving customers, whose tears I'd dried when he was bullied at school. whose college education I'd paid for with money I'd earned scrubbing floors at 2 a.m. Senile, I repeated quietly. Marcus seemed to realize he'd gone too far, but instead of apologizing, he doubled down. Mom, I'm sorry, but it's true. You're living in the past. You don't understand social media marketing, online ordering systems, modern customer service expectations. We've been trying to be patient, but your interference is hurting our ability to grow the business. Your ability? I asked. Yes, our ability, Kate chimed in. Marcus has been essentially running this business for 5 years now. He's the one who expanded to 3 locations. He's the one who modernized our systems and improved our profit margins. You've been living off the success of what he's built. What he's built? I felt like I was in an alternate universe where the past 45 years had been erased and rewritten, but they weren't done. Marcus pulled out another set of documents. We've been consulting with specialists, and we think it's time to have you declared incompetent to make business decisions. It's for your own protection, Mom. We don't want you to accidentally damage the business or hurt yourself financially. I stared at the papers. Incompetent. It's not personal, Kate said, her voice dripping with false compassion. It's just acknowledging reality. You'll still get a monthly allowance from the business profits, but the day-to-day decisions will be handled by people who understand the current market. An allowance. They were talking about giving me an allowance from the business I'd built, with my bare hands. How much of an allowance? I asked quietly. Marcus and Kate exchanged another look. We were thinking $3,000 a month, Marcus said. That should be plenty to cover your expenses. $3,000 a month from a business that was generating over $40,000 in monthly profit across 3 locations. They were planning to give me less than 8% of the income from my own company. And who made this decision about my allowance? I asked. The family, Kate said. Marcus and I discussed it extensively, and we consulted with Amy and Kevin. They're both old enough to understand the situation, and they agree that this transition is necessary. Amy and Kevin agree? I repeated. My grandchildren, who are 11 and 7 years old, agree that I should be declared incompetent? They're concerned about their inheritance being mismanaged, Kate continued, apparently not realizing how awful that sounded. They want to make sure the business is stable for their future. Their inheritance. My grandchildren, who I'd been supporting financially since birth, were worried about their inheritance. They were already calculating what they'd receive when I died, and they wanted to make sure I didn't mess it up by continuing to be involved in my own business. I looked around the restaurant I'd built from nothing, where I'd worked 18-hour days for decades, where I'd created jobs for dozens of people, where I'd served hundreds of thousands of customers. The walls were covered with photos of family celebrations, community events, loyal customers who'd become friends over the years. Every square inch of this place represented my blood, sweat, and sacrifice, and my son wanted to take it all away from me because I was just a senile old woman. The attorney cleared his throat. Mrs. Chen, these documents would formalize the transfer of management authority to your son. You would retain ownership of your shares, but Marcus would have complete control over all business decisions. It's actually quite generous. Many families in similar situations opt for more drastic measures. Like what? Having me committed to a nursing home? I stood up slowly, my hands surprisingly steady despite the storm raging inside me. I see, I said calmly. You've certainly given me a lot to think about. Marcus looked relieved, probably thinking I was going to go quietly into the night like a good little old lady. So, you'll consider signing the documents? Kate asked eagerly. Oh, I'll definitely consider everything you've said today, I replied, picking up my purse. This has been very educational. The attorney started to say something about reviewing the documents with my own legal counsel, but I was already walking toward the door. Mom, wait, Marcus called after me. We should discuss the timeline for this transition. I turned back to look at him one last time. Marcus, in 45 years of building this business, I've learned that the most important decisions require careful consideration. I'll be in touch. I walked out of my own restaurant, got in my car, and drove home in a daze. But by the time I pulled into my driveway, the shock had transformed into something else entirely. Crystal clear clarity. For the first time in years, I saw the situation exactly as it was. This wasn't about my competence or my age or my understanding of modern business. This was about greed, pure and simple. They wanted control of what I'd built, and they were willing to humiliate me, discard me, and steal my life's work to get it. But here's what they'd forgotten in their rush to push me aside. I hadn't built a multi-million-dollar business empire by being weak, naive, or easy to manipulate. I'd built it by being tougher, smarter, and more determined than anyone who tried to take advantage of me. And I was about to remind them of that fact in a way they'd never forget. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was upset or crying. I was long past that stage. I spent the entire night at my dining room table, surrounded by every business document, contract, and financial record I'd accumulated over 4 decades. What I discovered during those long hours would have shocked Marcus and Kate to their core if they'd bothered to pay attention to the legal details instead of just assuming they could steamroll over an old woman. The first revelation was the most important. While Marcus had been running around acting like he owned the business, I still controlled 68% of Golden Dragon Enterprises. He had a 32% stake that I'd given him as a gift, but I had never transferred majority control. The restaurants, the real estate, the equipment, the recipes, the trademarks, the customer database. I owned the controlling interest in everything. Marcus had been so focused on day-to-day operations that he'd never bothered to check the actual ownership structure. He'd just assumed that because he was managing things, he was in charge. But management authority and ownership are two very different things. The second discovery was even more interesting. The house I'd co-signed for Marcus and Kate back in 2014, the deed was still in my name. Through a series of refinancing deals and legal technicalities I'd agreed to over the years, I had somehow ended up as the actual owner of their $750,000 suburban home. They'd been living in my house, rent-free, for 9 years. Third, those college funds I'd been faithfully contributing to for Amy and Kevin. I was the sole trustee with complete discretion over distributions. The accounts contained $67,000 for Amy and $52,000 for Kevin, money I'd saved from my own earnings to invest in their future education. Fourth, and this was particularly satisfying, Marcus's beloved BMW, which he'd been driving around like a status symbol for 8 years, was still being financed through the restaurant's business account. Technically, it was a company car that I, as majority owner, had every right to reclaim. But the most important discovery was one I'd forgotten about until I found the paperwork buried in an old file. I had a Keyman insurance policy on myself. For $1.2 million, if anything happened to me, the business would receive a substantial payout. But more importantly, the policy included a provision that allowed me to temporarily transfer all management authority to a designated successor in case of emergency. The irony was delicious. Marcus and Kate were trying to have me declared incompetent, but I had legal mechanisms in place that would allow me to remove them from the business entirely if I chose to use them. I spent the next week quietly observing, giving them one last chance to show some respect, some acknowledgement of what I'd sacrificed for this family. Instead, I watched Marcus strut around his restaurants like a king, making grand announcements about changes he was implementing without my input. I heard Kate on the phone with her friends, laughing about how they'd finally gotten the old bat out of the picture. She was already making plans to redecorate the restaurants, talking about hosting a grand reopening to celebrate their new vision for the business. The breaking point came when I overheard a conversation between Amy and Kevin while they were visiting Kate's parents. They didn't know I was in the next room, and their words cut deeper than anything their parents had said. "I'm so glad Mom and Dad finally dealt with Grandma," Amy was saying. "Now maybe we can get our inheritance money without having to pretend to care about her boring old stories." "Yeah," Kevin agreed. "Dad says she was getting really weird about the restaurants, like she thought she was still in charge or something. It's embarrassing." "Mom says old people get confused and start living in the past," Amy continued. "She says we should be patient with Grandma, but I'm just glad she can't mess up our college money anymore. These children I'd loved unconditionally, whose every need I'd anticipated and provided for, saw me as an embarrassment and an obstacle to their financial future. They were already planning how to spend money I'd earned through decades of hard work, and they couldn't even pretend to respect me long enough to get it. That's when I realized that gentle lessons weren't going to work. They needed to learn about consequences in a way that would stick with them for the rest of their lives. I called my lawyer first. Patricia Williams had been handling my business legal affairs for 20 years. She was a sharp woman in her 50s, who'd built her own practice from nothing, and understood both the challenges of being underestimated and the importance of protecting what you'd worked to build. "Dorothy," she said when I explained the situation, "I'm not surprised this is happening. I've seen it dozens of times. Adult children start to see their parents as obstacles to their inheritance instead of people who deserve respect. The question is, how far are you willing to go to protect yourself?" "As far as necessary," I replied. We spent 3 hours going through every legal option available to me. Patricia confirmed what I'd discovered. I had significantly more power than Marcus and Kate realized. Not only could I remove Marcus from any management role, but I could also reclaim the house, the car, and the college funds if I chose to. "The key," Patricia explained, "is to act decisively and comprehensively. If you're going to make a move, make it count. Don't give them time to regroup and fight back." Next, I called my accountant, Robert Kim, who'd been handling my business finances for 15 years. I needed to understand the complete financial picture before making any drastic changes. "Mrs. Chen," he said after reviewing everything, "you're in a much stronger position than they think you are. The business is generating substantial profits, your personal assets are considerable, and you have multiple streams of income. You could survive and thrive without them much more easily than they could survive without you." The numbers were eye-opening. Golden Dragon Enterprises was generating $480,000 annually in net profit across 3 locations. My personal assets, including real estate and investments, totaled $1.8 million. I had been supporting Marcus, Kate, and their children to the tune of approximately $85,000 per year when you factored in the free housing, car payments, business salary, and college fund contributions. But Marcus and Kate? Without my financial support, they'd be facing a mortgage they couldn't afford, car payments they couldn't make, and a lifestyle they couldn't sustain on Marcus's actual business credentials. The final piece of my planning involved understanding exactly what it would take to execute my strategy. I contacted 3 different services: a locksmith company, a security firm, and a property management company. I wanted to make sure I could act quickly and decisively when the time came. The locksmith, Jerry Martinez, had been handling commercial security for 25 years. "Mrs. Chen, if you need to change locks on 3 different locations, I can have crews at all 3 sites simultaneously. The whole job would take about 2 hours. The security firm, Peak Protection Services, specialized in corporate security transitions. We can provide on-site security personnel to ensure the transition goes smoothly and prevent any unauthorized access," their representative explained. The property management company, Westside Property Solutions, had experience with residential ownership transitions. "If you need to reclaim possession of a property, we can handle all the legal notifications and logistics," they assured me. Everything was falling into place, but I still needed to decide on timing. The opportunity came when Marcus announced he was planning a management restructuring meeting for the following Monday. He'd invited the head managers from all 3 locations to discuss what he called exciting changes in leadership and direction. He was planning to officially announce my removal from any decision-making role and introduce his new vision for the company. The arrogance was breathtaking. He was going to use my own conference room in the restaurant I'd built to announce that I was no longer competent to be involved in my own business. Perfect. I'd let him have his meeting. But it was going to go very differently than he expected. Spent the weekend making final preparations. I confirmed all the appointments I'd scheduled for Monday morning. I reviewed every legal document with Patricia one more time. I prepared a list of exactly what I was going to say and do. Most importantly, I prepared myself emotionally for what was about to happen. This wasn't just about business. It was about family. I was about to take actions that would fundamentally change my relationships with my son, my daughter-in-law, and my grandchildren. There would be no going back after this. But they'd made their choice when they decided to treat me like a disposable obstacle instead of the matriarch who'd made their comfortable lives possible. Now they were going to learn about consequences. Sunday night, I called my other two children, Linda and Peter, to let them know what was happening. I didn't want them to be blindsided by the family drama that was about to explode. Linda, my middle child who lived in Portland with her family, was furious when I told her about Marcus's plan. "Mom, I can't believe he said those things to you. And Kate, I never liked her, but this is beyond the pale." Peter, my youngest, who worked as an engineer in Seattle, was more measured, but equally supportive. "Mom, you built that business from nothing. Don't let them steal it from you. Do whatever you need to do to protect yourself." Both of them offered to come down and support me, but I declined. This was something I needed to handle myself. I'd been fighting my own battles for 73 years, and I wasn't about to stop now. Monday morning arrived crisp and clear. I was up at 4:30 a.m., showered and dressed in my best business suit, a navy blue ensemble I'd bought for important meetings. I wanted to look every inch the successful businesswoman I was, not the senile old woman Marcus thought he was dealing with. At 5:00 a.m., I met Jerry Martinez and his locksmith crew at the original Golden Dragon location. By 5:30 a.m., we were at the second location. By 6:00 a.m., all three restaurants had new locks, new security codes, and new keys. Only I had access. At 6:15 a.m., I positioned myself across the street from the original location with my coffee, my lawyer, and a security guard I'd hired for the day. I wanted witnesses to everything that was about to happen. And that's when Marcus arrived, right on schedule, ready to start another day of running what he thought was his business. The show was about to begin. Watching Marcus's face cycle through confusion, disbelief, and slowly dawning horror as he realized his key no longer worked was better than any revenge fantasy I could have imagined. He tried the key 3 times, jiggling the handle and pressing his face against the glass to peer inside. Then he spotted me sitting calmly at the outdoor patio table, sipping my coffee like I was enjoying a peaceful morning. "Mom," he called out, walking toward me with forced casualness. "What's going on? My key doesn't work." I set down my coffee cup and looked at him with the same calm expression I'd perfected during 45 years of handling difficult customers and business crises. "Good morning, Marcus. Your key doesn't work because these are my restaurants, and I've decided you no longer have access to them." The words hit him like a physical blow. His mouth opened and closed several times before he managed to speak. "What are you talking about? You can't just... This is my business too." "Actually, Marcus, it's not." I gestured toward Patricia, who was sitting beside me with a briefcase full of documents. "As my attorney can explain, I own 68% of Golden Dragon Enterprises. You have a minority stake that I gave you as a gift, but I have controlling interest in all properties, equipment, and operations." Patricia stood and handed him a folder. "Mr. Chen, these are copies of all the business incorporation documents, partnership agreements, and property deeds. As you'll see, your mother retains majority ownership and has every legal right to control access to her property." Marcus's face was turning red as he flipped through the papers. This is insane. I've been running this business for 8 years. You can't just lock me out. I can, and I have, I replied calmly. The same way you were planning to lock me out of my own life's work by having me declared incompetent. That's when Kate's car came screeching into the parking lot. She must have gotten Marcus's frantic phone call. She jumped out of her BMW, my BMW technically, and stormed over to us. Dorothy, what the hell do you think you're doing? She shouted, her perfectly styled hair already coming undone in her fury. I stood up slowly, and something in my posture made both of them take a step back. For the first time in years, I was done being diplomatic, done being accommodating, done being the nice grandmother who swallowed insults and smiled. What I'm doing, Kate, is reclaiming my business from people who thought they could steal it from me, I said, my voice carrying the authority of someone who'd been making tough decisions since before she was born. Steal it? Marcus sputtered. Mom, I've been working in this business my entire adult life. I modernized everything, expanded to 3 locations, increased profits. With my money in my restaurants, using recipes I developed and a reputation I built over 45 years, I interrupted. Everything you accomplished was built on the foundation I created. But somehow you convinced yourself that you were doing me a favor by allowing me to exist in my own business. Kate stepped forward, trying to regain control of the situation. Dorothy, you're being unreasonable. We can work this out. Marcus was just concerned about your ability to... My ability? I laughed, and it wasn't a pleasant sound. Kate, you've never worked a day in the restaurant industry. You don't know the difference between gross and net profit. You couldn't identify half the ingredients in our kitchen. But you thought you were qualified to judge my competence? Patricia cleared her throat and handed Kate another folder. Mrs. Chen, you might want to review these documents as well. They pertain to the house you've been living in for the past 9 years. Kate opened the folder and her face went white. What is this? That's the deed to your house, I explained, calmly. The house that's actually in my name, which means you've been living in my property rent-free for 9 years. I've been paying the property taxes, the insurance, and the maintenance costs while you redecorated it and treated it like your own. That's impossible, Kate whispered, but she was staring at the legal documents that proved otherwise. Marcus was reading over her shoulder, and his expression was shifting from anger to panic. Mom, there has to be some mistake. We have a mortgage. You have a mortgage that I co-signed for, on a house that somehow ended up titled in my name through various refinancing agreements you asked me to sign over the years, I explained. I trusted you to handle the paperwork properly. Apparently, that trust was misplaced. The security guard I'd hired stepped forward. Ma'am, is there anything you need me to do? Actually, yes, I said, pulling out my phone. Marcus, I need you to hand over the keys to the BMW. What? Marcus looked genuinely shocked. You can't take my car. It's not your car. It's a company vehicle financed through Golden Dragon Enterprises business account. As majority owner, I'm reclaiming company property. Patricia handed him another document. This shows the vehicle registration and financing agreement. The car belongs to the business, not to you personally. Kate was frantically scrolling through her phone. I'm calling our lawyer. This is harassment. This is elder abuse. By all means, call him, I said calmly. Have him review the documents. He'll tell you exactly what Patricia just explained. Everything I'm doing is completely legal and within my rights as the business owner. Marcus was staring at the BMW like someone had told him his firstborn child was being taken away. Mom, please, I need that car for work. How am I supposed to get around? I don't know, Marcus. The same way you expected me to get around after you took away my role in the business, I suppose. Figure it out. The tow truck I'd arranged pulled into the parking lot right on schedule. The driver hopped out and approached us. Mrs. Chen? I'm here for the BMW pickup. Marcus looked like he was about to have a heart attack. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. I turned to address both of them directly. Here's what's going to happen. Marcus, you are terminated as general manager of Golden Dragon Enterprises, effective immediately. Your access to all business accounts, properties, and assets is revoked. You have until 5 p.m. today to return the company vehicle and any other business property in your possession. You can't fire me, Marcus shouted. I'm a partner. You're a minority partner with no management authority, Patricia corrected. Your mother, as majority owner, has every right to terminate your employment and revoke your management privileges. Kate grabbed Marcus's arm. We're not going to let her get away with this. We'll fight this in court. You're welcome to try, I replied. But you might want to ask yourself how you're going to pay for legal fees without access to the business accounts you've been treating as your personal piggy bank. The tow truck driver was already hooking up the BMW. Marcus watched in horror as his status symbol was loaded onto the truck. Mom, please, he said, and for a moment, his voice cracked like the little boy I remembered. Don't do this. We're family. That word, family, almost broke my resolve. For just an instant, I remembered teaching him to make dumplings when he was 8 years old, helping him with math homework at table 12, celebrating his college graduation with tears of pride. But then I remembered his voice shouting, You're just a senile old woman, and the moment of weakness passed. Family, I repeated quietly. Yes, Marcus, we are family, which is why it broke my heart when you decided to treat me like a confused old woman who needed to be managed instead of the mother who sacrificed everything to give you opportunities. Kate was on her phone with someone, her voice getting shriller by the minute. Yes, I need to speak to David Peterson immediately. This is an emergency. Dorothy Chen has gone completely insane and— Kate, I interrupted. You might want to save your energy. You're going to need it to find a new place to live. She stared at me. What are you talking about? The house you've been living in belongs to me. I'm giving you 30 days' notice to vacate the premises. 30 days? Kate's voice hit a pitch that probably made dogs howl 3 blocks away. You can't just kick us out. We have children. Yes, you do have children. My grandchildren, who you've taught to see me as an embarrassment and an obstacle to their inheritance. I looked directly at Marcus. Did you really think I wouldn't find out that Amy and Kevin were discussing how glad they were that you'd dealt with Grandma so they could get their inheritance money? Marcus's face went ashen. He obviously hadn't realized I'd overheard that conversation. Those children I've loved and supported since birth, whose college funds I've been contributing to for years, see me as nothing more than a source of money they're entitled to receive, I continued. Well, they're about to learn that entitlement and gratitude are 2 very different things. Patricia handed me another folder, and I pulled out 2 official-looking documents. These are notifications to the college fund administrators, I announced. As the sole trustee with discretionary authority, I'm freezing both accounts pending a review of the beneficiary's circumstances. Kate grabbed the papers from my hands. You can't touch their college money. That's for Amy and Kevin's education. That's money I earned and saved from my own income to invest in their future, I corrected. Money I contributed because I thought they respected and appreciated their grandmother. They can earn their own college funds by learning the value of hard work and respect, the same way I did. Marcus was looking back and forth between the locked restaurant, the departing tow truck, and the legal documents that were systematically dismantling the comfortable life he'd taken for granted. Mom, he said desperately, this is going too far. We can fix this. We can work together. I'll apologize for what I said. Kate will apologize. Marcus, it's not about apologies anymore, I replied. It's about consequences. For 45 years, I've been generous to a fault with this family. I paid for your education, your house, your car, your children's expenses. I gave you a partnership in my business and gradually handed over management, responsibilities. All I asked for in return was basic respect. I gestured toward the restaurant behind us. Instead, you tried to steal my life's work by having me declared incompetent. You called me a senile old woman. You discussed my funeral arrangements while I was sitting in the room. You taught your children to see me as an embarrassment. Kate was crying now, though I suspected they were tears of anger and frustration rather than genuine remorse. Dorothy, please. Think about Amy and Kevin. Don't punish them for their parents' mistakes. I'm not punishing them, I said calmly. I'm teaching them that actions have consequences, and that respect is earned, not inherited. Maybe if they learn that lesson now, they'll grow up to be better people than their parents. The security guard approached us again. Ma'am, the locksmith crew is finished at all 3 locations. New keys have been programmed and the old access. Codes have been disabled. Thank you, I replied. I turned back to Marcus and Kate. You have until close of business today to remove any personal belongings from the restaurants. After that, you'll be considered trespassing if you set foot on any Golden Dragon property. Marcus was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. I don't understand how you became so cruel. Cruel? I repeated. Marcus, I spent 45 years building something from nothing, so my children could have opportunities I never had. You repaid that sacrifice by trying to steal everything I'd worked for and calling me incompetent. If protecting myself from theft and disrespect makes me cruel, then I'll accept that label. Patricia closed her briefcase and stood up. Mrs. Chen, I think we've covered everything for now. Mr. and Mrs. Chen, if you'd like to discuss this situation further, you're welcome to contact my office to schedule an appointment. Kate was frantically texting someone, probably trying to find a lawyer who would take their case. Marcus was just standing there looking lost and defeated. There is one more thing, I said, pulling out a final document. Marcus, this is your severance package. 1 month's salary and benefits, which is more generous than you deserve considering you were planning to steal my business. He took the check with shaking hands. 1 month's salary wasn't going to cover their mortgage, car payments, and lifestyle for very long. Mom, he said one last time, please reconsider. We can make this right. I looked at my son, really looked at him. And for a moment, I saw the little boy who used to help me count receipts after closing time. But that little boy had grown into a man who was willing to betray his own mother for money and power. Marcus, I said gently, the time to make this right was before you decided I was a senile old woman who needed to be pushed aside. You made your choice. Now you get to live with the consequences. I walked toward my car, leaving them standing in the parking lot of the restaurant they'd thought they were stealing from me. Mrs. Chen, Patricia called out, where would you like me to send the final paperwork? To my office, I replied. The office in the Golden Dragon restaurant that I built 45 years ago and will be running for years to come. As I drove away, I could see Marcus and Kate in my rearview mirror, still standing there like their world had just ended. Because it had. The next few weeks were, quite frankly, some of the most peaceful and energizing I'd had in years. Once the initial shock wore off, I discovered something remarkable. I loved running my restaurants again. Without Marcus's constant interference and Kate's undermining comments, I was able to implement changes that actually made sense. I promoted Helen Kim, my assistant manager who'd been with me for 15 years, to general manager of the original location. Helen understood my vision, respected the traditions that had made us successful, and had the experience to maintain our standards. For the second location, I promoted Roberto Mendez, who'd started as a line cook 12 years earlier and worked his way up through every position in the kitchen. Roberto knew food quality, understood customer service, and had the loyalty that comes from being appreciated rather than taken for granted. The third location went to Maria Santos, the same Maria Gonzalez that Marcus had fired for not fitting his vision. Maria had been with us for 12 years and had never received a single customer complaint. Her crime had been questioning one of Marcus's cost-cutting measures that would have compromised food quality. All 3 of my new managers were people who understood that success comes from consistent quality, excellent service, and treating both employees and customers with respect. They didn't need to reinvent the wheel. They just needed to return to the fundamentals that had built our reputation in the first place. The results were immediate and dramatic. Within 3 weeks, customer satisfaction scores began climbing back toward our historical levels. Food costs dropped by 18%, simply by returning to suppliers I'd worked with for decades and eliminating the expensive premium ingredients Marcus had been purchasing from his buddy's overpriced distributorship. Employee morale improved dramatically once the staff didn't have to navigate the constant tension between Marcus's demands and my standards. Several long-term employees who'd been considering leaving decided to stay. We were able to hire 3 new people, experienced restaurant workers who'd heard through the industry grapevine that Golden Dragon was once again a good place to work. Most satisfying of all, the restaurants were running more efficiently than they had in 3 years. Without Marcus's need to justify his position by constantly making changes, we returned to the smooth operations that had made us successful. Customers noticed the difference. Our online reviews began improving within a month. But of course, Marcus and Kate didn't go quietly into the night. The first week after I reclaimed my business, they tried everything they could think of to fight back. They had their lawyer, David Peterson, call Patricia multiple times threatening various lawsuits. But once Peterson actually reviewed the contracts and ownership documents, the calls stopped coming. He apparently explained to them what Patricia had already made clear. Everything I'd done was completely legal and within my rights as the majority business owner. Marcus showed up at my house twice during the second week, alternating between angry demands and tearful apologies. The first time he was furious and accusatory. "Mom, you've destroyed our lives," he shouted from my front porch. "Amy and Kevin are asking why they have to change schools. Kate can't sleep. I can't get a job anywhere that pays enough to cover our expenses. You have to reconsider." I looked at him through the screen door. My son, reduced to begging on my doorstep because he'd taken my generosity for granted and tried to steal my life's work. "Marcus," I said calmly, "you destroyed your own lives when you decided to bite the hand that fed you. I gave you opportunities, partnership, financial support, and a comfortable lifestyle. You repaid that by calling me incompetent and trying to steal my business. These are the consequences of your choices." The second time he came, his approach was different. He brought flowers and tried the remorseful son routine. "Mom, I'm so sorry," he said, tears streaming down his face. "I was wrong about everything. Kate was wrong. We let greed and entitlement cloud our judgment. Please, can we go back to the way things were? I promise things will be different." For a moment, my heart softened. This was still my child, and seeing him cry brought back memories of comforting him through childhood disappointments. But then I remembered his voice shouting, "You're just a senile old woman," and the moment of weakness passed. "Marcus," I said gently but firmly, "the way things were is exactly the problem. The way things were meant you taking advantage of my generosity while treating me with disrespect. If you want any kind of relationship with me going forward, it will have to be built on completely different terms." "What terms?" he asked desperately. "First, you acknowledge that you were wrong, not just about the business, but about how you treated me as a person. Second, you find a way to support your family without my financial help, so you can learn the value of what you threw away. Third, you teach Amy and Kevin to respect their grandmother instead of seeing me as a source of money they're entitled to inherit." He left that day without agreeing to any of my terms. I haven't seen him since. Kate tried a different approach. She had Amy and Kevin call me, clearly coaching them from the background. The first call was from Amy, who was 11 years old and crying. "Grandma, why are you being so mean to Mommy and Daddy?" she sobbed into the phone. "They said we might have to move to a smaller house and I might have to change schools. Why can't you just forgive them?" I could hear Kate whispering instructions in the background, which broke my heart. She was using her own children as emotional weapons against me. "Amy, sweetheart," I said gently, Your parents made some very bad choices about how to treat your grandmother. Now they have to face the consequences of those choices. Sometimes, adults have to learn difficult lessons, just like children do. But Mommy says you're being unfair because they were just trying to help you. Amy continued, clearly reciting words she'd been taught. Amy, do you remember when you were 7 and you broke my favorite vase while you were playing in my living room? Yes, she said quietly. And do you remember that I didn't yell at you or punish you? Because I knew it was an accident and you were sorry? Yes. But what would have happened if you had broken my vase on purpose, and then lied about it, and then told me I was too old and stupid to have nice things anyway? There was silence on the other end of the line. Your mommy and daddy didn't break something by accident, Amy. They tried to take away something that belonged to me on purpose, and they said very hurtful things about your grandmother. That's very different from making a mistake. I could hear Kate in the background, hissing something at Amy, but Amy had gone quiet. Kevin's call came the next day. At 7 years old, he was less effective as an emotional weapon, but Kate tried anyway. Grandma, Mommy says you don't love us anymore because you took away our college money, he said in the rehearsed tone of a child reciting lines. Kevin, I love you very much, I replied. But love doesn't mean giving people things they haven't earned or don't appreciate. Your college money is safe, but you're going to have to learn to be respectful and grateful before you can have access to it. But I don't understand what I did wrong, he said, and this time he sounded genuinely confused rather than coached. Kevin, when you visited Grandma Kate's house last month, do you remember what you said about me? Silence. You said you were glad your mommy and daddy dealt with Grandma so you could get your inheritance money without having to listen to my boring stories. Do you remember saying that? More silence. Kevin, when you talk about your grandmother like she's already dead and you're just waiting to inherit her money, that hurts my feelings very much. If you want your grandmother to help pay for your college, you need to learn to treat your grandmother with respect. I heard the phone being grabbed away, and then Kate's voice. Dorothy, you have no right to manipulate my children with your guilt trips. Kate, I replied calmly, I'm not manipulating anyone. I'm teaching them that respect and gratitude are prerequisites for generosity. It's a lesson you should have learned years ago. She hung up on me. But here's the interesting thing. The conversation with Kevin must have had an impact, because 3 days later, he showed up at my house with Amy. They'd ridden their bikes over without their parents' knowledge. Grandma, Kevin said when I opened the door. I'm sorry I said that mean thing about you. I didn't really understand what it meant. Amy was more hesitant, clearly still influenced by her parents' coaching, but she managed, I'm sorry too, Grandma. I don't want you to think I don't love you. I invited them in for cookies and milk, and for the first time in months, we had a genuine conversation. Not about money or inheritance or college funds, but about their school, their friends, their interests. I told them stories about their father when he was their age, about immigrating to America, about building the restaurant business. For the first time in years, they actually listened. They asked questions. Amy wanted to know what it was like not being able to speak English well when I first arrived. Kevin was fascinated by the story of how his grandfather and I painted the entire first restaurant ourselves. When it was time for them to go home, Kevin hugged me tight and said, Grandma, I think your stories are interesting, not boring. Amy was more reserved, but she said, Grandma, will you teach me how to make dumplings sometime? Of course, sweetheart, I replied. Anytime you want to learn. They started visiting me once a week after that, always without their parents' knowledge. Slowly, gradually, I began to see glimpses of the children I'd raised and loved, rather than the entitled little strangers their parents had been turning them into. I didn't immediately restore their college funds, but I started a new tradition. Every time they visited, I would give them small tasks to earn spending money, helping with yard work, organizing my recipe collection, assisting with simple restaurant paperwork. They were learning that money comes from work, not entitlement. Meanwhile, Marcus and Kate were discovering what life was like without my financial support. They'd listed their house for sale within 2 weeks of my ultimatum, but in the current market, they were unlikely to get enough to pay off their mortgage and have money left over for a new place. Marcus found a job managing a small family restaurant across town, but the salary was less than half what he'd been making at Golden Dragon. Kate had to return to work for the first time in 10 years, taking a part-time position at a marketing firm. They sold both their cars and bought used vehicles. They canceled their country club membership, their premium cable package, and Amy's expensive dance lessons. For the first time in their adult lives, they were living within their means, rather than off my generosity. I felt no satisfaction in their struggles, but I felt no guilt either. These were the natural consequences of their choices. They'd had comfortable lives because of my hard work and sacrifice, and they'd thrown it all away because they wanted more than I was already giving them. My other children, Linda and Peter, were incredibly supportive throughout this entire ordeal. Linda flew down from Portland to spend a weekend with me, helping me process everything that had happened. "Mom, I'm so proud of you for standing up for yourself," she said as we walked through the original restaurant together. "Marcus and Kate took advantage of your kindness for years. It was time someone taught them about consequences. Peter called me every few days to check in and offer support. Mom, you built something amazing here. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for protecting it." Both of them had successful careers and stable families. They visited regularly, treated me with respect, and had never asked me for financial support. Beyond the normal gifts that flow between parents and adult children, the contrast with Marcus's behavior was stark. Most importantly, I was rediscovering who I was beyond the role of generous grandmother who enables everyone. I was Dorothy Chen, successful businesswoman, community leader, and matriarch of a restaurant, empire I'd built from nothing. I was sharp, decisive, and perfectly capable of running my own affairs. My blood pressure had dropped to normal levels. I was sleeping better than I had in years. Dr. Martinez was amazed at the improvement in my overall health. "Dorothy, whatever changes you've made in your life, keep them up," she said during my quarterly checkup. "Your stress levels have clearly decreased dramatically." I was even dating again, something I hadn't done since Jin passed away 12 years earlier. Harold Kim, a widowed businessman I'd met through the Chamber of Commerce, had been asking me to dinner for months. For the first time in years, I felt confident enough in my own worth to say yes. 6 months after I reclaimed my business, Golden Dragon Enterprises was thriving in ways it hadn't for years. We were profitable, efficient, and growing our customer base. I was considering opening a 4th location. Most satisfying of all, I was once again the respected matriarch I'd always been, rather than the pushed-aside obstacle Marcus and Kate had tried to make me. It's been 8 months now since that glorious Monday morning when I changed the locks on my restaurants and reclaimed my life. 8 months since I reminded my son that you should never underestimate a woman who built an empire from nothing, especially when she's got nothing left to lose and everything to protect. As I sit here in my office, the office that Marcus tried to turn into a storage room, reviewing profit reports that show Golden Dragon Enterprises is more successful than it's been in 5 years, I want to share some hard-earned wisdom with all of you watching. First, and most importantly, your age does not determine your worth. Society tries to convince us that getting older means becoming less valuable, less capable, less deserving of respect. That's garbage. I've learned more, accomplished more, and become wiser in my 70s than I was in my 30s. Experience has value. Wisdom has power. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Marcus and Kate made the classic mistake of confusing my kindness with weakness, my generosity with stupidity. They thought that because I was willing to share what I'd built, I was incapable of defending it. They forgot that the same strength and determination that created my success could be used to protect it. Second lesson. There's a difference between being generous and being taken advantage of. For years, I confused enabling my family's entitlement with expressing my love. I thought that constantly giving them money, opportunities, and support was the same as being a good mother and grandmother. But real love sometimes means saying no. Real love means teaching people to be self-sufficient rather than dependent. Real love means demanding respect rather than accepting disrespect, because family is family. I spent decades trying to make life easier for my children, but I accidentally made them weaker. Marcus never learned to truly appreciate what he had because he never had to work for it. Kate never learned respect because she never faced consequences for her disrespect. Amy and Kevin were growing up entitled because they'd never been taught gratitude. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is to stop rescuing them from the consequences of their own choices. Third, never apologize for protecting what you've worked to build. When I first started taking action against Marcus and Kate, several people, including some well-meaning friends, suggested I was being too harsh or letting pride get in the way of family harmony. But there's nothing prideful about refusing to be stolen from. There's nothing harsh about defending your life's work from people who want to take it without earning it. Family harmony that's built on one person accepting disrespect and abuse isn't harmony, it's dysfunction. I didn't work 18-hour days for 45 years, so my son could call me incompetent and steal my business. I didn't sacrifice my youth and comfort, so my daughter-in-law could treat me like a confused old woman who needed to be managed. I didn't save every penny to build something lasting, so my grandchildren could see me as nothing more than a source of inheritance money. Marcus learned too late that the hand that feeds you is usually attached to someone who remembers being hungry. Kate learned that dismissing someone as old-fashioned doesn't make their experience less valuable. Amy and Kevin are learning that respect and gratitude aren't old-fashioned concepts. They're timeless requirements for civilized relationships. Now, I know some of you might be wondering, do I miss my son? Do I regret the harsh actions I took? Am I lonely without the family relationships I had before? The honest answer is complicated. I miss the son I thought I had, the grateful, respectful, young man I believed I was raising. But I don't miss the entitled, disrespectful man he became. I miss the idea of having a close relationship with my grandchildren, but I don't miss being treated like an ATM machine with legs. What I've gained is so much more valuable than what I've lost. I've gained self-respect, peace of mind, and the satisfaction of knowing I won't be pushed around or taken advantage of. I've gained the knowledge that I'm still sharp, still capable, and still perfectly able to run my own life and business. I've also gained new relationships with Amy and Kevin that are based on genuine affection rather than financial obligation. They visit me regularly now, and we're building the kind of bond I'd always hoped for. One where they see me as an interesting person with stories to tell, rather than just a source of money. Marcus and Kate? They're learning to live within their means for the first time in their adult lives. It's been a difficult adjustment, but it's also been educational. Marcus recently sent me a letter, not asking for money or forgiveness, just acknowledging that he's learning to appreciate things he used to take for granted. That's progress. It's not reconciliation yet, but it's progress. To all the grandparents, parents, and older adults watching this, you deserve respect. You deserve gratitude. You deserve to be valued for your experience, your wisdom, and your contributions. Don't let anyone convince you that your age makes you less worthy of dignity and consideration. If family members are treating you like this, tell your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for listening.